I'm very excited to welcome to the program comedian, activist, musician, reality television personality, and winner of RuPaul's Drag Race Season 8, Bob the Drag Queen. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing about as well as anyone could be expected to, considering this year. What about yourself?
Same. I mean, I always say all things considered, I'm doing well.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a healthy perspective. We've got a lot of different things that we want to talk about with you. But before we launch into the specifics, can you tell us a little bit about your background in political activism, how you got into some of the issues that you're organizing around and advocating for?
Well, I mean, my journey into activism was centered around this group I used to be a part of called Drag Queen Weddings for Equality, which led me to this other group called Queer Rising. We used to do these demonstrations. We used to do these demonstrations in Times Square every Saturday about like disparities in the queer community and the straight community. And we would do these full like conversations and like demonstrations and hand out paperwork. And then I started moving into slightly more radical forms of activism with it getting arrested and blocking traffic. And so that was my beginnings with activism.
Okay, well, I know, through much of this year, some of that sort of in-person organizing has been made a little bit more difficult, but I know that you've been adapting by holding things like the first annual Black Queer Town Hall on your YouTube page. Can you tell me about that event?
Yeah, so Black Queer Town Hall was, me and my friend Peppermint were having these discussions like every night about injustices in the Black community, specifically the Black queer community. And then I saw Obama did a town hall, and I remember thinking to myself, like, oh my goodness, like, it's so great to see this. I wish there was someone speaking specifically to me and my Black queerness, been doing a town hall. And I was like, well, I'm sure someone else would want to see that, so I organized it myself.
That's awesome. And so, what are some of the things that were ended up being discussed at the event?
So we had some great panels with discussions. We had everyone from like MJ Rodriguez from Pose. We had Monet Exchange, Peppermint, Taldrick Hall, Laverne Cox, Isis King, Basit. We had so many great people joining us in these conversations. We talked about things like being Black while trans, like what it's like to be Black and trans within the Black Lives Matter movement. We talked about tokenism in the Black community. We talked about what do we do now? Like what do we do now that this movement is getting a big resurgence? How do we keep that way of going and keep justice as a steady flow throughout America?
That's awesome, and I'd love to focus on a couple of the different topics that you just mentioned there. With perhaps the first being in terms of the media talking about the trans community, the issues that it faces. I've always been struck by that I see more of that conversation going on in the past few years, but a lot of it is taking place on the right, focusing on what they see to be sort of divisive social issues that they think are beneficial to focus on, like demonizing trans participation in like college sports and things like that. Tell me a little bit about the media coverage of the community, some of the misconceptions that you've dealt with.
Well, I mean, I'm really intrigued by the idea that I think the word fear-mongering is appropriate in this place. There's this idea that there are these people from the left trying to, take the rights away from people on the right, or that trans people are trying to sneak into sports and like beat your children up at wrestling, and that's what the trans agenda is, or that the trans agenda is somehow has something to do with sneaking into bathrooms and misbehaving in there. When I think anyone who knows a trans person knows that that's not quite the case.
Yeah, 100%.
What it is appealing to the most easily manipulated human emotion, which is fear, and that's why they do it.
Yeah, unfortunately, and it seems, many of them, I see Tucker Carlson relatively frequently talks about the trans community, almost never has an individual from the community on the show, and is almost always demonizing. And it's unfortunate to see that and to not see much balance in that. But I want to talk about what are some of the things that, I mean, you had the Black Queer Town Hall, like focusing specifically on that as opposed to, for instance, non-Black, the queer community, or for instance, you talked about having an acknowledgement of the issues that affect the trans community, but specifically the Black trans community. Tell me a little bit about some of what you feel like isn't either understood or acknowledged or talked about enough in the specific experiences of those communities?
Well, the reason why I'm focusing on the Black queer community instead of just the queer community in general, like there comes a point where like not whenever, but often when people of color want to talk about their specific experiences, there is this moment where people like to say, well, what about? What about us? What about the white people who are also experiencing so and so? I mean, the best analogy I've ever seen was someone said that's like going to a march for breast cancer and being like, yeah, but don't forget about diabetes. Yeah. Like, don't forget diabetes is fully still a thing. And it's like, yeah, no one said that. No one's talking about that. This is what we're talking about at this moment.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I believe that you were on the conversation with Adrienne Lawrence just a few weeks ago on our network. And I think some of what's been going on in terms of the civil rights protest was talked about. It seems like over the past few months, there's been quite a bit of acknowledgement and representation in these protests for specifically acknowledging that Black trans lives matter. Has that been your perception? Would you like to see more inclusion of the specific concerns of that community during these protests?
Yeah, I want to see way more of it. I mean, I think that what we need is not just a bunch of like queer people saying it, but what we need is like cisgender straight Black men to be saying this as well. We need it. It can't just come from within. It has to come from without as well. So the support for the Black trans community has to come from. We need like Jay-Z and Lil Wayne and Barack Obama and all these like big names, because these are the people that like straight Black men look up to.
Yeah.
And we need them to join the movement.
Do you see any signs that might be happening?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, the fact that we have like Dwayne Wade, who has a trans child who's speaking out favorably, that's huge. It is both profound and it is huge.
Yeah.
But we need more of that.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, speaking as someone not in the community, but having the minor media platform that I have as being a part of the media, what can I do to help?
I think uplifting Black voices, uplifting queer voices, uplifting trans voices. I think that where I'm sitting here, maybe you could have a Black trans woman, maybe sitting here you could have a Black trans man give their experience of what it is. Instead of you and I assuming what the experience is, you can have a Black trans person sitting here and telling you.
Yeah,
I have a long list of Black trans people I could send your way.
I would actually very much appreciate that. Thank you. I also wanted to. Oh, sorry. Continue.
I just said, of course, I can recommend my dear friend Mila Jam. I can recommend Peppermint. I can recommend Shia Diamond. I can recommend Teak Milan. I'll send you a list of them.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.